But the fact is, the US is incredibly unusual anywhere in the world among democracies for the way that it ties criminal convictions to voting rights. This is not an accident. This is, in very large part, a direct effort to minimize non-white voter power, particularly Black voter power, and particularly in the South is where it is most pronounced to this day. But if you go around the country, literally like every state has some slight difference, in some cases, major differences. There are some states where if you get a felony conviction, you never regain the right to vote. There are a couple states, Maine and Vermont, as well as Puerto Rico and DC, where you never lose the right to vote, even if you're in prison. And so between those states where you are presumed to lose your voting rights for life, Virginia, Iowa, Kentucky, Tennessee, Mississippi, those states all vary a little bit, and it kind of depends on who's the governor at the moment. But anyway, between those states and Maine and DC and Vermont and Puerto Rico on the other side, you have a very wide range of approaches. And this is a huge and overlooked story of untapped political power, deliberately untapped, silenced. Ahead of the 2023 elections, I did a little project going around Mississippi and Kentucky and Virginia. And I had a conversation with somebody in Mississippi, which is one of the harshest states in the country, to try to cast a ballot in if you have a felony conviction on your record. And somebody I talked to there, I think put it well, said that every time you're at the ballot box, just remember that there are ghosts standing behind you, people who should be in there, who would otherwise be in there if not for policy that deliberately sought to minimize the voter voice. So this is how you end up in certain states with, up to 10%, sometimes more, of Black adults who are disenfranchised, who can't vote. I think an overarching theme, and something that I'm sure we'll get to today, but something that is particularly pronounced in this space is, I like to say that every election that you see, any election results, comes with an asterisk. Doesn't mean that they aren't legitimate, but who gets to vote, what kind of access they have, that varies so widely by states. In some cases, it varies widely by counties. As a result, the outcomes that you see, this candidate won by 100 votes, this candidate won by 1,000, those are results of subjective human decisions. This isn't like, God given, like, this is how it is. These rules are made up by real people. And in when it comes to voting rights and criminal justice, the minimization of people's rights is a very deliberate and very ongoing choice. It's super dynamic. It's changing all the time. So we try to keep a close eye on it.
Yeah. Yeah. And sort of at the other end of that spectrum, this is not specifically felon disenfranchisement, but I know you wrote recently about Colorado and what's happened there. That is the first state, I believe, to require that jails serve as polling places. Is that right?
Yeah. That is very closely related to what I was just talking about, and a super interesting, super overlooked issue. People in U.S. jails, in most cases, retain the right to vote. In most cases, these are people who are in jail pre-trial. That is, they've not been convicted of anything. In many, many cases, these are people who are there not only pre-trial, but only because they cannot afford to buy their freedom. So you have thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of people across the country every election sitting in jails who are functionally unable to vote because the local officials who could facilitate that access, generally speaking, do not care to lift a finger to do that. Sometimes that's because of apathy. I'm a sheriff. What do I have to do with voting? I'm overseeing this jail and making arrests. There's nothing to do with me. Sometimes it's that. In some cases, it is actual hostility. Why would I provide voter access to this population. But the fact is, these are eligible voters, just like you and me. And in most cases, they are overlooked. There's a handful of places in the country that do it well, that make a point to take jail voting seriously. That includes Houston, Chicago, Denver, Flint, Michigan. I've written a good bit about. But by and large, that access doesn't exist. People are functionally cut off. And that's something that I think the vast majority of Americans don't realize. I'll give you a quick example. The largest jail in the state of Colorado is in Colorado Springs. It holds about 1,600 people. And the state of Colorado was considering a bill last year to become the first in the country to command that every single jail set up an in-person polling place to facilitate access. And the local clerk and the sheriff's office came down to the Capitol to testify against the bill. And they said, we're not denying anybody voter access. We don't need this mandate. And one of the state senators said, okay, so how many people voted there in your 1,600 person jail in 2022? Well, the answer was zero. Zero people had voted there. If you don't go out of your way to create the access, people who are in cages, who are unable to, as easily as you and I can, log on to register or, change your address to obtain a ballot or work with the local clerk's office to cure a ballot if there's a signature discrepancy and there's a question about whether you're going to be counted. Anyway, what it all adds up to is a massively functionally disenfranchised population. And I think the Colorado bill, which again was the first in the nation, shows it's not that hard to undo this. Colorado passed this bill saying you have to put a polling place in every jail in the county, in every county jail in the state. And voter turnout in Colorado jails increased tenfold between 22 and 24. So that's an example of a policy innovation that's there for any officials who care to look into this and fix the problem. But in most cases, they don't.
Yeah. And I guess why is that? I mean, I know that there are grassroots groups, there are the Desmond Meads of the world who are working at various levels to try to increase this access. But I think if you, as you were saying before, if you take together both the formerly incarcerated people and the currently incarcerated people, that's a good chunk of voters that are being left off the playing field. I mean, it would seem that elected officials and people running for office would want those votes, especially if they think that those votes are going to work in their favor or might help them win an election. Where is that disconnect?
I think that incarceration and post-incarceration is by design a hugely isolating experience. There are so many ways that the world signals to you, both when you are inside of a jail or prison, once you get out, in some cases before you ever get there, that you are something other. You are in essentially an underclass. Try securing housing or getting certain professional licenses. For example, if you're coming out of jail or prison with a conviction, it's very hard. So the question of, well, why doesn't anybody care to address this? This is all these potential voters. Why are they excluded? Well, why is the food in jails and prisons so incredibly disgusting? Why are people paid pennies per day for labor in prison? In some cases, not paid at all. This is all part of the same kind of, again, isolating, intentionally dehumanizing experience. I think often that it's pretty wild that we call these the system that oversee these facilities departments of quote unquote correction or rehabilitation. It's no secret that in many cases people come out more traumatized, more isolated than they were before. It's the same in the voting space. Now, why has this not been addressed? I think there are a few reasons. One has to do with a general feeling by politicians, particularly on the right, but definitely on the left as well, that this is not a population worth sticking their neck out for, that they might pay a price in a primary or a general election or have an ad run against them or something if they go out of their way to bring this population or a segment of this population into the fold. In my view, when everybody feels that way, it helps to keep the Overton window where it is. There are certain places, Colorado being an example, that through this like jail voting policy show you can do this. The sky doesn't fall. By the way, it's a pretty common misconception that people in jails and prisons routinely lean left or would routinely vote in favor of criminal justice reforms that might reduce the length of sentences or criminal penalties. There isn't comprehensive data on how exactly incarcerated people lean, but I can tell you it's a much more complicated picture than you think. I've talked to people in jails and prisons who run mock elections where Trump won in blue suburbs or blue cities. I have personally interviewed people in jails and talked to them about their politics, and they're not uniformly anything. You might be surprised by that, but I don't think that that's how politicians see it, particularly Republicans. And so there are a lot of reasons why change generally doesn't happen in this space and why we're stuck in this place where Maine, Vermont, DC, Puerto Rico are the only places in the country where you can vote from prison. Every year, a number of states bring bills to change this. This year is no exception. We've seen bills at least in Maryland and New Mexico, and they just don't go anywhere. Almost without exception, they do not go anywhere because it's just not a group of people that politicians really care to support.